It might seem like if-else statements are pretty limited. After all, the only thing they can do is pick between two possible options. But we're going to learn a few tricks to make them more powerful. One of those tricks is the if-else-if statement. An if-else-if statement is a way to choose one code block from a bunch of code block options. We want to start integrating decisions into our OOP code, so for this video we're going to work with a class called K12 Student and a demo program called K12 Student Demo. The code for both files is available from the GitHub repository for this course, and I've got a link to that in the description and in the ebook. This is going to be a class that just keeps track of a student's age and grade level. Here's the class design, and you can see that it's pretty basic. When you compare the diagram to the code we're starting with, you'll see some differences. There's no constructor yet, and we'll save that until close to the end. There are a couple other inconsistencies here. We have a getSchoolType method, which should return elementary school, middle school, or high school, for example. But we don't have a field called schoolType, which we would expect to go with that getter. And with gradeLevel, we have kind of the opposite. We're missing a set method for that field. These are all intentional, and we'll talk about them as we go. A quick peek at the demo class shows that we've got code to create an instance and set some values, then output some values to show that everything is working. I've commented out a chunk of code to create and test a few other objects with different values. That way we can just uncomment it later as we add more functionality. But for now, I'll leave that code commented out. And before we get to all that, we're going to take what we already know about if statements and apply that knowledge to our understanding of encapsulation. Remember that encapsulation is the idea that we should keep our fields private and only allow access to them through methods. The way we've been writing our getters has been fine, since all they're supposed to do is return the current value of the field. Until now, though, our setters have just assigned whatever value they receive to that field. That's not very effective encapsulation, since it still allows other code to mangle our data and do whatever it wants. But with if statements, we can make our setters a little smarter and a little more secure. Let's start with the grade level field. The grade level of a student is determined by the student's age, so we don't want a situation where those two don't match. If the student is 16, we don't want some other code to come along and set the grade level to 3. So we're not going to have a setter for grade level. We'll just set that value in our setAge method. Speaking of setAge, we're allowing the age to be set to any int value, but we're talking about a K-12 student, so we know that the age should be between about 5 or 6 years old and about 18 years old. If the value passed in is outside that range, we'll need to address that. Let's start by adding an if statement below that assignment to see if our age is too low. And to keep things simple, we'll say that a student needs to be 6 years or older. If that Boolean expression is true, our age is too low, so we'll just set it to 6. There are other ways we could handle this. Maybe we just leave the age what it was before, which is a common approach, or maybe we set it to some kind of flag value that indicates an error, like -1. When we learn more about programming, we might trigger something called an exception, but as beginners, we'll just set it to 6. And now after that if block, I'll add a similar one to check if the age is too high. If it's above 18, we'll set it back down to 18. Notice that our code is setting the value of the parameter that's passed in, then it's making an adjustment if necessary. We could also write the decision statements before the assignment, if that's what we prefer. And we'll test that out. The demo class sets the age to 4, which is out of range, so we'll look at the output with the getGradeLevel method to see if it corrected our value when we use the setter. It did bump that 4 up to a 6, so it's doing what it's supposed to do. Now, before we move on from this, I mentioned that we can use the age to determine the grade level, and that's why we don't have a setGradeLevel method. Let's just set the grade level to the age -6. I know that in reality it's not quite that simple, but that demonstrates the point that our setter can be a little more complex than just assigning a value. And we'll test that out. Now, that's obviously not a perfect system for protecting that age field and for setting the grade level, but it's an improvement over just having a bunch of setters that don't check anything. And now we can move on to the get school type method. There's no field for school type because that is completely tied to the grade level. For our purposes, students in grade 0 attend kindergarten, then they attend elementary school until 5th grade, and then on to middle school for 6th through 8th grades, and finally high school for 9 through 12. Let's add an if statement to check if the grade level is 0, and if it is, we'll return kindergarten. And let's go test that out. Okay, with that part working, we can now add our else statement. But here's where we have a problem. An if-else structure lets us choose between two options, but we have more than two options here. If I put elementary school, then I don't have a way to address the middle and high school students. So what we can do is just tack another if statement onto the else keyword. And this one will check if grade level is less than 6 for an elementary student. This idea is called an if-else-if structure. If the first condition is false, it will check this one. If this one is false, it will go on to the next else block and so on until it either finds a true condition or runs out of options. So in this body, we'll return elementary school, and we still have two options to go. So we'll add another else if to check if the grade level is less than 9, which is middle school. And if the student isn't in any of those that we've checked, then they must be in high school. So now we'll just have an else block that returns high school. This makes high school the default or kind of the catch-all, essentially. When I added that else statement with a return, I got an error on this return statement that's outside of my if-else-if block. That's because the compiler knows that this can never execute. The final else means that one of the code blocks is guaranteed to run, and all of the code blocks have return statements already. It's impossible to ever reach this line, and the compiler doesn't like that. So we'll just delete it. Let's go over to our demo program and uncomment all these other test cases. VS Code has a shortcut for this. Just highlight all the commented code and then press Ctrl/ to toggle the comments. On a Mac, that will be Command/. That keystroke will toggle the highlighted code between commented and uncommented, and it's really handy. And now we'll run this and see if the grade level and school type are working correctly. All right, with the tricky part of the code working, the last thing I want to look at is the constructor. Let's create a constructor with parameters for the name and age. Remember, as long as we have the age, we can figure out the grade level. And as long as we have the grade level, we can figure out the school type. So these two are the only pieces of data we really need. Now, name is no big deal since it doesn't have any restrictions. We'll just assign that. Our age does have restrictions though, so we need to make sure it's not out of range. It's tempting to just copy and paste that code from our setter because I don't want to type it all out again. But anytime we find ourselves copying and pasting code, we should stop and ask if there's a better way. In this case, we can just call the setAge method that we've already created and that already has all of that logic. That will take care of all of this for us. And it means that if we ever change the way we handle age, we only have to change it in that one place. So instead of an assignment statement, we'll just call this.setAge and pass in the age parameter. And we've broken our demo class. Remember that the compiler won't make a default constructor anymore since I've defined a constructor of my own. So we'll just go over to that file and comment out the default constructor calls and then replace them with instantiations that use our new constructor. I'll just use the same data for each object, including the last one, which assigns an age that's out of range. Then there's some lines of code to change that and output it again. And we'll go ahead and run that. Okay, so this class is now wrapped up. We've seen how we can use decisions to improve our encapsulation, and we've also seen how we can use if-else-if structures to choose from more than two options. I've still got a couple decision tricks left up my sleeve, but we'll keep going with those in the next video.